Okay, thank you for your patience, everybody. I'm going to call the work session to order. Ms. Sons, can you please do a roll call attendance?
Yes, Councilmember Henry. I think you're on mute.
Present.
Councilmember Mock.
Present.
Councilmember Sayer.
Present.
Councilmember McKnight.
Present.
Mayor Johnson.
Present. Thank you, Vicki. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for tuning into tonight's work session. The City Council is meeting remotely pursuant to Minnesota Statute Section 13D.021 due to the ongoing health pandemic. Work sessions are conducted to provide City Council with introductory information, opportunities to provide staff guidance, and to facilitate initial conversations on a topic. No votes are taken. As such, there is not an opportunity provided for members of the community to provide comments or to ask questions during a work session. Those interested in providing comments to City Council can do so during the regular meeting via Zoom. Information related to joining the Zoom meeting is available on the agenda under the quick link, Watch City Meetings and View Agendas and Packets on the bottom of the homepage at cityofcarver.com. All right. With that, let's move on to the first item on our agenda tonight, the Certified Levy Project Update. Happy New Year, Todd. How are you doing?
Doing well, Mayor, City Council. It's good to see you all remotely again. It's been a while since we've chatted. We've got a lot accomplished. I'm going to try to share my screen here so we can go through our presentation.
Under the quick link.
And I noticed, Aaron, one of the things that did not come up when I went to share my screen was that little dialog box to share the audio on the video we're going to show. I'm going to stop sharing and try again. That did not come up. There it is. All right, so want to get you an update on where we're at with the Certified Levy Improvement Project. Little background on maybe where we've been a little bit, and talk about some of the public engagement, some of our design configurations. We have made some changes, the update to the cost estimates as well, and then some of the funding updates, and then next steps as we progress through the project. So a little bit of background. The levy protects the downtown historic district, and it has been deficient for freeboard, clear zones, steep slopes, seepage, and then approximately 55 properties behind the levee are impacted by the 100-year flood elevation, which restricts the level of improvements that individuals can make, and then also requires the purchase of flood insurance, which is a burden to those property owners. A little background on where we've been. Before 2021, the city began looking at feasibility for the certified levy. In February, the council reviewed a preliminary work plan for 2021. In March of 2021, the city received its first funding from the DNR and Lower Minnesota River Watershed District funding partners. And then we began our defined work plan in April of last year. During the summer and fall, we had some public engagement, some geotechnical reviews, construction limits discussions, some refined costs, and I'll go into all of those as we move forward. And then we'll talk about some of the findings that we have this year and some of the next steps. So looking at the 2021 work plan and goals, the Carver levee improvements, project communications engagement, we did geotechnical, and that was kind of interesting. We did not find any cars. For those of you that were interested, I'll just throw that one out there right away. Topographic surveys were completed, very detailed survey of the entire levee system and adjacent properties. Preliminary design configuration was updated, and then we'll show you some of the construction impacts and then also some of the refined costs. And I want to share with you a video that was completed this year.
The historic city of Carver is located along the Minnesota River and is home to about 5,000 residents. Carver was established in 1852 before Minnesota became a state. Carver was a very important shipping port because it was the last stop along the river before rapids made the channel impassable. Many come to the riverfront for activities such as fishing, kayaking, or watching wildlife. However, snowmelt and heavy rain can cause flooding and significant property damage, which can be devastating for the city and residents. Following the historic flood of 1965, community efforts were approved to plan, construct, and pay for the Carver levee. It has kept the city safe for more than 55 years. As the levee ages, the conversation has begun on how to protect the city of Carver from future floods. Updates, improvements, and certification of the levee is needed to ensure this vital piece of infrastructure serves to protect homes and businesses from future flooding. A certified levee will provide additional benefits to the community. Homes and businesses within the 100-year floodplain will no longer have to pay excessive flood insurance, and improvement restrictions will be lifted. This will allow the historic downtown to thrive and be preserved for future generations. The path to levee certification will require more than $12 million in upgrades to this important piece of Carver's infrastructure. The city knows that this level of investment is not something it can do alone. The city needs support from funding partners to pay for the improvements to the levee. So far, the city has received grants from the Minnesota Department of Resources and the Lower Minnesota River Watershed District for the preliminary design work that is currently underway. The city is also working with elected state and federal leaders to secure additional funding assistance. In time, we hope to have secured external funding for improvements to the levee that are necessary to keep the city of Carver safe for generations to come. Visit the project website to learn more and provide your feedback.
Now,
The historic city of Carver is located along
so looking at the project communications and engagement, some of the things that have happened in 2021 up to this point is we did hold one-on-one meetings with all of the residents and business owners and property owners along the route of the levee. Anybody that we thought would be impacted by the levee construction, we did one-on-ones on site with those individuals. We received several positive responses, and we also really had some great takeaways from each of those meetings for their key concerns on each of those parcels. But one of the things they talked about is that communication is the key. They want to be made aware of improvements as we go, have some say in the design concepts as we move forward. And then one of the things that we have to remember is this is a marathon. It's not a sprint. So we're not looking at probably key construction pieces at this point in the upcoming year. So we do have some time to continue that communication and to build that communication and start laying the groundwork for how the project will come together. And part of that, we have a lot of unknowns still because we do not know if we're going to be phasing the project to fit the funding that is made available. So we may do portions of the levee or others. And as we get into this, we can communicate and continue to do that. So stakeholder engagement meetings. We want to continue to inform the agencies as well as our residents and business owners for critical design decisions. And then we're also been coordinating with Scott County on some of the adjacent trail project limits and the bridge crossing of the Minnesota River that's proposed for the Merriam Trail. Clear and consistent project messaging. We want to make sure that our branding, our project website, and project videos are all up to date and that we're saying a consistent and steady message as we go so that we can keep some of the rumors at bay. And if folks have questions or they're hearing rumors, we always encourage folks, reach out. Our phone numbers are available, our emails are there, city staff are there, and we meet on a regular basis to update everyone and make sure our messages are consistent. So this was the notice that went out to the homeowners. It asked permission to get on their properties to complete a survey. We did receive those back from folks, and we were able to complete the survey this summer. And I'll show you some of the results of that work. We also completed a geotechnical evaluation, which really was soil borings. Not only did we use the borings that we completed this year for some of our analysis, but we also went back and pulled the historic borings from properties and previous work that the city or the county or others had completed within proximity of the levee. That way it allowed us to use some of that old data and supplement that with new data in areas where we might have some questions. The good news is we have some really good data. We didn't see any major changes in the soil horizon as we went through the levee. So we're pretty confident that we have a clear understanding of what soils exist in the levee and also the soils that are below the levee, which are really important for stability. And we're still waiting to hear back on some of the seepage reports from Braun. They're working on that right now as we gave them the preliminary design, and they're giving us some direction. Topography survey. This survey really looks at identifying all of the features that are in, on, or adjacent to the levee. And that means the nearest structures where there might be key trees, bridge abutment locations, roadways, and defining the slopes and the bottom of those slopes, and anything that would be affected or could be affected by the possible construction, the proposed construction of the levee. Preliminary design configuration. So let me, one of the things, I might go to the next one here. Let me see. I'm going to start here and then I'll go back to those other two slides. Our assumption for moving from the preliminary concept that we developed previously to now, well, the concept to now preliminary design, which I would call a 30% design is where we're at today, is our assumption on preliminary is that the levee was moved towards the river where we could. Did somebody have a question?
I don't see any. Keep going, Todd.
Okay. So that we wanted to see what the impact would be to the river and to the community if we just picked up the levee and moved it over, say, 20 feet to give us our clear zone that we need between structures and the toe of the levee. And the toe is where natural ground touches the slope where we start going up the levee. And then the impact that would have on the river, and so that we could try to eliminate some of those retaining walls we had planned previously. So this was our assumption on getting us to 30% plan. So you'll see that as we move forward. So I'm going to go back, and to do that, to get distance from structures and properties and to look at the overall design constraints for the project, you'll see that in one of the segments here, and this is the segment where the existing trail is in blue and the proposed alignment is in green. And this is the intersection of Spring Creek coming down through the levee and out to the Minnesota River. Steamboat Park is right here, or Tugboat Park is over here. So you'll see that one of the things we're looking at in the preliminary design is moving that bridge structure to the river. We don't see a way we can keep that bridge structure where it is today, but we have it in the budget to move the abutments and then pick up the bridge and move it to a new location. And the reason for that is we have these historic properties adjacent on the north side, and we really can't get the spacing we need by keeping that bridge where it is today. So paging down, this is the preliminary design configuration. You'll see this is pretty small, but we'll get into some blown up sections as we go through some of the others. This is the part of the levee down here that I was talking about previously. That's probably the major alignment shift on the levee. And the second major alignment shift is going to be at the entrance to Riverside Park. One of the concerns that we had at Riverside Park is currently when you come over the bridge, that hill is fairly steep coming up to the levee and then back down to Riverside Park, the campgrounds and the boat launch. So sight lines for pedestrian crossings there are a concern. We wanted to improve some safety and see what the impact would be to put in some minimum sight lines that meet design constraints. Currently, that crossing does not meet any design considerations. I'll pause here for any questions. I'd hear a little bit of feedback.
What does not for considerations mean? Like that you wouldn't make any changes?
Um,
To
Can
that
you-
last, piece, the bridge that has questionable sight lines.
oh, it's really just the top of the slope in that vicinity where the trail crosses adjacent to the Riverside entrance under the historic bridge. The current design the current trail crossing does not meet any standard for engineering design and for safety. And one of the things that we want to do is have a reason for why we've designed things to make it fit some design criteria that has been established by some entity for safety for pedestrians, and that's an important parameter that we consider in all of our designs. We have limits to what we can and can't do from a safety standpoint for the public.
So if I understand correctly, you're saying it would be like redesigned. It would be
Yes,
not, okay, thank you.
this I covered. So here's the main levee west of Spring Creek. Knowing how we came up with that design to move the levee over. So it stays pretty consistent with where we are, except for the piece I previously talked about in and around the bridge configuration. You'll see that one of the considerations that we'll want to talk about as we continue to proceed is how many access points do we have from Main Street here up to the levee and where those take place. We're proposing to possibly remove one of these, and I think it's this one right here, which kind of gives us a mid-block crossing and also comes through the back of some of these parcels. And there's a reason for some of that. So we can refine that. It's 30% plans right now, and we plan on meeting with all of these folks in the near future as part of our engagement plan, and we'll get into that. There are some segments where we feel the retaining walls are necessary. The structures of the existing homes are so close to the levee that we can't physically move the levee far enough away from them and not adversely impact the flood elevations on the Minnesota River. Or we would have extremely significant wetland impacts that would not allow us to move that further away from these structures. So we do have some segments of retaining wall. And those reside mainly in the section from Riverside Park to the north. We have some structures in this vicinity that are very close to the toe of the levee and also just north here on this segment. So we are still moving the levee, but we are anticipating the need for retaining walls here to allow us to have that 15-foot of maintenance between those structures and the toe of the levee, which would now be the retaining wall. This also shows you a little better blown up version of coming under the historic bridge at Riverside Park. The blue is the existing trail crossing. And in order to make this slope less steep, we've pushed the levee over to the east quite a bit. And so that allows us to have a flatter slope here and a safer crossing for pedestrians and for people entering and exiting Riverside Park. Gives you better sight lines to be able to see those pedestrians using this facility. I'll pause there again for any questions briefly.
Does that moving of the trail out impact any of the existing campsites that are along the river there? Does it encroach?
I will check into that, but I think the first campsite is over on this parcel.
Okay,
I don't think we get far enough over into that parcel to affect that campsite.
gotcha. That's kind of what I thought, but again, wasn't sure. Thanks.
Well, that's a good question. We'll answer that for certain as we go through the process.
Okay.
So now we move on to Spring Creek. And Spring Creek, our design scenario for this has not changed a lot from our previous concept. The one thing that you will see is this is the business side, or what I would call the east side of Spring Creek, where City Hall is. And this would be the residential side or the west side of Spring Creek. And so in the previous concept, I believe we had an additional retaining wall in this vicinity. Here in this concept, we're looking at it probably will blend better with that residential side, and we may not want to encourage pedestrian use along these private parcels to blend that back into the existing grades that are there. I think it'll make it blend much better with the neighborhood and the adjacent users for that. So that's what we're currently proposing there. With the elevations to walkouts and accessibility into the structures on the commercial side or the city hall side of Spring Creek, we are still proposing a retaining wall to allow access to the rear of those. We also will be looking at some utility easements. We have discovered through our survey work and through our soil borings and other things in our observations out there, there are several utilities that penetrate the levee and from these structures to Spring Creek. Some of them have been abandoned, but probably not abandoned properly. And others have been reconnected and may still have connections to Spring Creek. So we're going to run a parallel system behind those down to Main Street and tie them into the city's utilities there. So they're isolated from Spring Creek. So it reduces the chance that when Spring Creek floods, we don't get water backing up from Spring Creek into these utility connections, specifically stormwater and some of the sanitary that runs too close into these structures and behind our levee, giving us some higher risk. So that's one of the pieces that we'll work on as far as how those utilities actually will work in the next segment. So overall, looking at Spring Creek, you can see that we have what I'm going to call the Riverwalk portion of the levee is going to start just south of City Hall and run all the way down to Main Street. And then we're on the residential side, we'll have one side a retaining wall and then blend it back into the adjacent properties. We do have, there will more than likely be some retaining wall south of Main Street in this segment. Because the slopes are so steep there and we have some repairs to make. Through our survey work, we found that the toe of the levee in this location is comprised of rotting railroad timbers. And so those need to be removed. Right now, I think they've been used to anchor the bottom of that levee. And so we need to replace those with something that will work in the long term.
Todd, I have another question.
Go ahead.
When you're talking along Spring Creek and you show it there in red, you used the phrase Riverwalk. Is it truly like a walkable? Is it going to be a walking path or just what it's called?
That would be the goal, is that it would be, that was the concept we showed in the concept version. We've carried that into the preliminary. We had shared that previously, and there was, in our conversations with the property owners, there was a desire to have that accessibility back there. We can refine that as we get into the final design process in the next design phase. Working specifically with the property owners. We had some requests at the property in this location on the southwest corner of Main and Broadway that this piece here, there's some need for some potential parking in the future. And also the slopes from here are very difficult to get ADA compliance in this location. And there's not a lot of room between Spring Creek and these parcels. So we're proposing at this point, I believe, to remove this segment of this access and keep the access in locations that line up with intersections.
Okay, back to that river walk in red, like outside of cost, is there things that would take that off as a proposed project, or are there things that would make it really difficult?
Well, the difficult part of that piece is going to be having accessibility meeting ADA requirements for it. We likely will have some staircases. We'll try to bring in some ramps to get accessibility from one side or the other. We may not be able to accomplish accessibility in both the upstream and downstream side of it. One of the things to remember as we walk through the cost discussion, and maybe I'll save that for later, But the city of Carver's costs on this project are capped at a certain dollar amount. So costs beyond that are borne by the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources Flood Mitigation Program. So as we walk through this, remember that the cost segment for the city of Carver is fixed from that standpoint, as long as we're using that funding source. The other thing I should bring up here is 3rd Street and possible bridge reconstruction there. And I think that's a project unto its own, but we have set that request up and that funding source to accommodate the future design of the levee as well. So those costs are already incurred in that particular project. And they're not included in our estimate today.
While you're on that, can you go back just one more, since you had the line that I want to ask about? So south of Broadway, kind of where the tugboat sits today, I see the green line is a little bit, are you showing a different connection there up to the levee than where it is today? Yes,
we are. And
Okay.
There's 2 reasons for that. One is that's the proposed where this green line meets the existing trail. That's the proposed alignment of the river crossing from the regional trail coming in from Scott County.
Gotcha.
And then this also allows us to have an ADA accessible slope on this trail to get up to that trail alignment. So it allows us to meet the ADA requirements.
Thank you.
I'm going to piggyback quick on what Joy was asking here about this trail connection. So, excuse me, when thinking about, that's a pretty kind of long sweep there to go to the one side. I'm a little worried about trailblazing, the trail term for when people take the shortcut, basically. So is this something we could V off and have it go both ways? Or a little bit of a triangle. I understand keeping it that way if that's where we're looking to have that trail connection across the river, but I really think once they get a little closer to the top there, they're going to just end up cutting across the grass, and then that just gets worn down. So
I appreciate that comment. It's one of the things that every time I go to a college campus, I go, why didn't they just put a sidewalk there? Because all the grass is gone. People are going to go where they're going to go, right? So that's a good comment, and we'll take that into consideration. It might be something where we might need to add some stairs, or let's look at the slope when we're done with this.
So if there's one other question, then if we were to make that piece ADA accessible, if we had a little bit of kind of an offshoot come off and land in a V, but kind of where the old one comes off, do we need to make that ADA accessible, or could that be a steeper section? Because obviously the shorter the length, the cheaper it is to build.
That's true. There's 2 constraints. There's the ADA accessibility, so we need to provide that somewhere, and that's a great location for it, because it also where the alignment from that bridge comes, it allows us to get that length. The other is when we have bicycles and bicycle grades, so we'll look at that too. There's a federal trail design guide that we're going to have to look at for that slope as well coming down there, because we wouldn't want to have necessarily bicycles coming down at a 10% grade into a pedestrian shared facility.
Okay, thanks.
That makes sense. It creates a conflict between the speed of the bicycles and the walking pedestrians. Wetland impacts. So this was one of the things that we wanted to evaluate, and the areas in red, we did do a wetland delineation out here. And I would say that there was a lot of cooperation between the Scott County project and our project. We shared resources on a number of things. They did some borings for their bridge abutments that we used. And we shared some cost in that. And then there was some wetland work that they did that we shared. They've done some archaeological and historic work that we've been sharing back and forth too. So there is good cooperation between the 2 different projects, and we're trying not to duplicate costs for any government entity. We want to share those costs reasonable, so the public isn't getting charged twice for the same work. So this is the wetland impacts. These are our initial thoughts. You'll see one of the biggest impacts is where we're moving this trail over to accommodate sight lines and make this a safer crossing for pedestrians and for vehicle users. And then the other is in the vicinity of where we're looking to relocate that bridge. Now, I think this one is a little bit overstated, and Aaron and I are working on trying to minimize that. This is actually the extension of Spring Creek, runs right through the middle of this. So I think we'll be able to narrow that up quite a bit over what's shown there. But in total, the wetland impacts are right around 1.3 acres. That's probably not a lot for this size of a project, but we've also included mitigating for those losses in the cost of our project, and I'll show that to you later. Any questions on wetland impacts?
Nope.
Hearing none, I'll move on. Property impacts. One of our goals in this project were to look at this stage of preliminary design, we're to identify where the levee will be and what properties will be impacted and who will be impacted and who will we need to discuss perhaps permanent or temporary easements or even full takings, which I don't believe there's any here that are proposed to be full takings. There's, looks like a small remnant parcel that we're discussing whether it would be an easement or something. All these residents we've talked to when we talked about the design, and we did mention that we'd probably need some temporary or permanent construction easements and access easements or levee easements. So they're aware that we're looking at this. We have not started bringing back this concept to them yet. So they have not seen what the total impacts will be on each parcel. And we probably wouldn't do that until we start refining some of the details. But we're in a good position where we can begin those conversations should we get additional funding to move us forward. I'd also say that we're still in the land swap process with U.S. Fish and Wildlife. It's nearing completion. They're doing some pretty detailed title work, and Brent can probably get you up to speed on the title work, but the title work is very sophisticated here. There were some missing pieces and they were filling in some of the gaps, and they had to track down some folks that had some titles given to them, but they lost the trail of paperwork. So they had to go and track down all their relatives, and they're getting some signatures. And U.S. Fish and Wildlife has taken the advance on that. Brent, do you want to add anything to that?
You got it covered.
Okay. All right, moving on to funding updates. We had a number of meetings this summer with delegates in our representatives and senators, both at the state level and at the federal level. We had one meeting with U.S. Congressman Tom Emmer. He came down and spent some time with us and walked the levee and did it. And really, we shared what we could with him, and we're hoping that he's going to be able to get it into the representative side of the federal bonding consideration. I will say that we did hear back last week from Senator Klobuchar's office that she was not successful in getting it included in the Senate side of things, but that they're going to continue to work on that, and that we should continue to work with our representative Tom Emmer to try to get it on the other side so that it might find its way into a bill through reconciliation process between the two houses. We worked, House Capital Investment Committee did a tour as well. They're the ones that look at the infrastructure bonding, and this is the year of infrastructure bonding for the state of Minnesota. And we also did the same with the Senate Finance Committee and toured. So both houses at the state level have been into Carver and showed strong interest in the project. At this point, I don't know that we've been earmarked for anything specifically, but we do know that it's found its way. The $20 million funding level for the DNR's flood mitigation program, which is the levee program we're currently in, does have some funding, and we're following up what that would mean for Carver with the DNR staff. And we have not heard back yet, but we'll get an update to you as soon as I hear back. And then the 2022 bonding session is underway. So we'll continue to work with these legislators and the different committees to try to see if there's a way we can increase our funding as that session comes into order in the next several weeks. So funding update or cost update. The previous cost on the concept plan was $11,150,000. Our current estimate is about 12 million. The reason for that increase is really a number of things. I would say primarily some of the escalation in cost for construction. As everyone has seen, we have in your grocery stores and everywhere, there's supply chain issues and concerns, and we've had significant supply chain issues in the construction industry as well. And we're seeing some of those price pressures ramp up. And so we've added some inflationary things to our estimate. And so we're at 12 million currently. So we broke it down a little differently in anticipation of how funding might come to the city of Carver. So we're starting to think about staging and how we might stage this and construct it in different pieces. So you'll see that the levee improvements west of Spring Creek or south of Spring Creek is about 2.7 million. Then we go to the east side, which is the Riverside Park side, or the north side of Spring Creek, and that's $3 million. And then the levee improvements along Spring Creek is about 6.3 million. And the reason for that price for that is it's really two levees, one on each side of Spring Creek, and then also the retaining walls add additional cost to that for a total of $12 million. Where will the funding come from? DNR flood reduction grant, damage reduction grants of $9.5 million. Lower Minnesota River Watershed District has pledged $150,000. And currently the Carver project is $2.35 million. But I will say that the DNR has not updated the city of Carver's contribution to reflect the 2020 census findings. So as the DNR has warned us in the past, they will be updating that probably with our update to our contract following this year's bonding session. So we will see an update in that number, and I would guess that 2.35 number will go up. We've added residents, and probably the income on those residents is higher than some of the previous income. So I'm guessing that number will raise. I don't know what that would be, but we could probably take a crack at it. I'll ask Pat Lynch to run that number for us now so we can update that. And then federal funding is to be determined. So with that, I can entertain any questions on funding.
All right, Council Joy, it looks like you took yourself off mute.
I did. So the city of Carver portion, are we allowed to use funds from federal funding or other sources to meet that contribution level, grants or otherwise?
My quick response to that would be no.
Okay.
And I would say that although federal funding would be great to get on this project, we will have a serious discussion as to the amount that would come to the city of Carver as to whether it's a good idea. It comes with a lot of strings that will add additional costs and delays to the project. So we'll have that conversation depending on how much money would be allocated to the city.
Okay.
Todd, does not some of the funding that we got from the source like the Lower Minnesota River Watershed District, would that not count towards our portion?
That would count as a local match. And if we were to get anything from the county, that would also be considered a local match.
Which would go towards our what's now 2.35, right?
Correct. Yep.
All right, Christy, any questions?
Yeah, are we ready for full questions now or?
Well, I was going to talk a little
Slide.
bit about next steps.
Sure, yep.
Oh, sorry.
No, that's okay.
Go ahead, Todd. Why don't we hold our questions until the end?
Okay. Public engagement is a big part of our next steps. Now that we have a preliminary plan, launch of that project video we showed you earlier. 2022 communications plan, we're currently working on that. We anticipate open houses, some pop-up events, and some project signage. And some of that signage, we're looking at QR codes to be placed around and people can put their phone over them and then get into some of the project information pieces. And then we're going to come back with our preliminary plans and do some one-on-one meetings and walk through in more detail so that as we refine those plans, we can reflect the impacts to those various properties. We're going to continue seeking funding at the legislature. We're going to work with them. We may end up having to do some testimony to the Senate or the House side of things. So we want to be prepared for that, and we are preparing for that right now. And then refine the project work plan. Right now, we're kind of at the end of what we said we would do in this step. And we're looking for additional financing so that we can start to do project delivery projections, start anticipating construction schedules. And then we want to continue agency coordination for permitting, which will be a big process as we move through to the next phases. Now I'm at questions.
All right, Christy, go ahead.
Great, thanks. A couple of comments and questions. I'll go to the trail that's along the creek. I do like having the trail just on the business side. I think that is appropriate. When we're looking at the other side, when you talked about kind of bleeding it back into and grading it back down, I know, okay, Jeremy Gestock's house, which is actually on Main Street, he has a shed that's close to the levee. Have you talked with that homeowner about, you know, different structures? And there may be some other ones along that line too, where there's a shed or something that's not historic, but is on the property of what's going to happen there.
I have talked with him on the phone. We have not been able to meet up, and he was okay with just a phone conversation at this point in time. We will get back out and talk to him about the preliminary plans and where the touchdown points are likely to be on the property there.
Okay. Let's see here. So on that end of things too, when we're looking here at this slide, the trail, if behind the Hartley house here, the one that kind of comes just down into the road there that doesn't have a crossing across the street where the end of the blue line is that the section that we're looking to take out?
Well, it's one of the conversations that we're having. This one here, the crossing to the west, the next one over, is really too steep to meet ADA requirements. And it's really, I don't know if we have enough room to make that work because we have bridge abutments there as well. So there's a conversation as to whether we leave that, but maybe mark it as non-ADA compliant. And then this one here, I think we need to refine this because there is there's going to be a lot of conversations around the property and easement pieces in this stretch of the levee. Some of these property owners own on both sides of the levee. And in order to get our maintenance strip, we're gonna have some serious conversations about how we go about acquisition, easements, and those types of things.
So the one that falls behind the Hartley house, which is the blue one right now. So I used to live in the house that's in between those two. So that one is far less used in my experience than the one that is to the west, the left of it on this picture. I would not be in favor of removing that trail connection. People are on that all the time. It's another connection that's close to the downtown. I mean, for example, I drove into town today. There was people coming down that one and the one that was to the west of it. So I really prefer to see that one to stay, whether it's signed ADA, whatever it has to be. That is a heavily used piece of trail right there. I would be very disappointed to see that come out.
This one right here.
That one should stay, in my opinion. Let's see here. If we can go back to one of the photos that has where we enter Riverside Park, I wanted to ask a question about Shannon O'Brien's house. So her house, I don't know if you can use your cursor, is right next to the entrance going into Riverside Park.
One here.
Oh, I can't see your, hold on, sorry,
Yeah, that's her house.
either way, there we go. My screen with everyone's faces wasn't covering that. Okay, so what are we planning to do there? Her house is very close and it looks like we're not doing much moving the levee out farther. So is that going to be just strictly retaining walls behind her?
In this location, we are moving the levee quite a ways into the Minnesota River here. I believe we're somewhere between 35 and 40 feet. We're going to reclaim this riverbank that's been washing out over the years. We have some slope concerns there. So this will be pushed to the river. That's our proposal. We'll work with DNR to get approvals for that. And then there will be a lot of arming on this side. And we may have a small stretch of retaining wall in here, but right now we're not showing in this location the need for that retaining wall. But it is still fairly close to her house. So we may want to give ourselves some more room and put something there.
Okay, is there a reason that this doesn't show that proposed trail piece out farther?
Well, we can't push it any more to the river. And our initial assumption was to try and get the maintenance strip from the toe to adjacent structures to 20 feet, even though it only needs to be 15. That was our first go around. That gives us some room to do some stuff. But that's definitely further away than it is today.
Okay. Just making sure I have all my questions here. Well, you were talking about the seepage reports earlier, and obviously we're looking for seepage, but can you give me just a little bit more in-depth explanation of what we're expecting or what we're hoping to come back with that?
Sure. I'll use, let me come back to this one here. We don't have it shown on this particular slide. But what we're analyzing is when the river is at its 100-year flood, this water, first of all, levees are not typically impervious, meaning that it won't stop all water from moving into the city. But the way that it'll do it is it'll run through the soil and seep through the soil. That's why we call it seepage. It'll come under the levee, and then it starts to come back up on the other side of the levee, the dry side of the levee, I'll call it. And one of the concerns and one of the reasons that levees fail is that when that water comes through, if it comes through fast enough, it starts taking all of the soil with it, just like a river eroding. It's an underground river, and when it pops out, it'll start taking the dirt with it, and then the levee will collapse on itself. So what we want to do is we'll put a drainage system underneath, a storm sewer pipe, drain tile scenario that will capture that water as it comes under the levee, keep it underground so it doesn't erode the toe of the levee here and cause failure. And then we take that water to the city's lift stations and pump it back over into the other side. So really, there will be drain tile or storm sewer connections on this side under the toe of the levee to capture that water as it passes from the river under the levee and wants to come back out on the dry side of the levee.
Okay, thanks. I have one last question then. Can we go back to the one that shows where the trail bridge is? Okay, so this is a county bridge still, correct?
Which bridge?
The pedestrian bridge that's going over behind.
This one?
Mhm.
Over Spring Creek.
Yep.
I believe it's still a county bridge. I'm not sure how that was initially constructed and what the terms were with the city.
Okay, Brent, if it's not a county bridge, let us know, but otherwise we're going.
Yeah, it's more than likely owned by the rail authority, which is essentially the county.
Okay. So that went in with some major pilings and major construction. That is a big bridge. So we're talking about just, we're going to lift it up and move it. That is going to be strictly at our cost, correct?
That is eligible for the DNR money, and it's included in our project estimates. Yes.
Okay. Then that's all I have for the question on that. That's all I have for you.
Thanks, Christy. Joy?
I didn't have any further questions. You answered them all along the way. Thank you.
Great. Sorry, I'm just going from top to bottom on my list here. Let's
No,
see.
that's okay. I do want to
Lori?
concur though on the trail elimination of that blue one connection down onto Main Street. I'm a frequent levee trail user and I never use that connection, whereas I use the western going ones more often. Yes.
Right.
So I support that removal. Okay, I'm done.
Thanks, Joy. Lori?
No questions, just a feedback and some input. I think that's great that there was such high level of engagement on the property owners that were reached out to. So appreciate that. And what Councilmember Mock and then Councilmember McKnight just commented on what's on the screen right now. When I've been on that trail, I agree. The one more to the west is just more heavily used. Just I don't know if it's just more like easy to see. I don't want to rule out what's being shown in blue until we know more about if there were increased parking spaces. That would be, I guess I'd want to know more. But that's the feedback I wanted to give.
Thanks, Lori. Glenn?
My question goes to the city of Carver's funding sources. Have we even discussed whether we're going to bond or what our options for funding is? I know it's really preliminary, but it's still, let's call it what it is, 2.3 million.
So you'd have to bond for that. I can't envision being in a position where we'd have existing cash on hand to fund that. So it's in our long-term financial plan. So we'd still have to try to figure out with Baker Tilly and our bond council, what type of bond, because it's, we're not going to specially assess it. So that'd be a 429 bond, but there are a handful of options, but as you can imagine, funding a levy improvement isn't something that most cities do on a regular basis. So we definitely do have to do some work. And then on the backside of that, have a conversation with the council then on the associated tax impact of that. But all that is embedded right now in your long-term financial plan. So it is contemplated just at some point when the council feels like it's relevant to have maybe an in-depth conversation on what those impacts are and talk about strategies related to that.
If I might interject here real quick on that response, one of the things I want you to be aware of as we go through this is the funding program from the DNR requires us to match 50-50. So DNR puts in $1, the city puts in $1 until you've contributed that 2.3 million, and then they continue to contribute and you're done with your contribution. So it's that 2.3 we have to match until we spend a total of 4.7 million. And then after that, the DNR would pick up all the costs beyond that, state of Minnesota.
With it being a bonding year and with everything that we have, as far as, I know nothing's set in stone yet, but do we have any potential construction dates? Give me a year.
I don't think it would be appropriate right now to give a year. I don't know what the funding level will be. And once we get that funding level, then we'll start to sit down and figure out when that might happen. There's a lot of things. The land acquisition and easement process is a process that will take over a year to do it itself.
Okay. All right. That's a great non-answer. But
then you'll most likely see this project done in phases too, where you won't see all 12 million of it done at once. It might be the Spring Creek portion, then it might be the east arm, then the west arm, based on how funding levels work, which might be an advantage to the city at some point, just to kind of spread those costs out over several years.
Got it. All right, that's all I have for questions. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Glenn. Todd, I know you don't want to give us firm timelines, but I've still kind of talked to folks in broad brush strokes, and I've always said between shovels in the ground and levy certification, it's a reasonable expectation to expect it to be about 10 years. Is that still accurate?
Yeah, I think that would be the timeline that would be reasonable to give folks for planning.
Okay. I'm afraid that I know the answer to this question, but I just want to ask it. We're looking at doing this potentially in phases, depending on how we get the funding set up. You can't certify a levy in chunks, right? It's all or nothing.
Correct.
Okay. Let's see. I saw that the governor's 2022 capital budget recommendations came out, and unfortunately, the city of Carver's levy is not a standalone. I know that we do have our foot in the door with the DNR's flood mitigation grant program. But I just want to kind of talk strategy for a second, and just so that we're all on the same page. I think the home run and my number one goal is to try to get on that list for outright bonding, for a couple of reasons. There's, in my mind, and let me know if I'm wrong, but there's no match, although the city does have skin in the game, and I think we've done a good job of demonstrating that when we have all of our visitors. But I just want to make sure that that's still kind of our goal when we're strategizing to try to find these funding partners and when we're searching for state funds for this project.
Mayor, that's absolutely what we want to do. And I know that we're meeting internally on Thursday, and one of the things I want to talk about is a legislative strategy. We've already went through one legislative session, and it's just being persistent with them. And we should set up some meetings with our legislators and go and meet them and go to their office and spend some time with them. We may even want to talk to the chair of the bonding committees and spend some time with those folks as well, and let them know how important Carver is to the state of Minnesota overall from a historical perspective. And then also that the priority of this project is the priority is life and property. It's definitely a need, as opposed to the conversation we've had in the past, a want, right? So there's a big difference between what we're asking for in the Carver levy to protect life and safety and property, as opposed to some of the other things that are prioritized in the bonding bill.
All right, my final question, and I alluded to kind of having our foot in the door with the Minnesota DNR flood mitigation grant program, but do you know, I know that it's kind of an inverse pyramid, right? Where the folks who are at the top get the most money and we're at the bottom. So we're very grateful for the money that we're getting, but we're getting smaller amounts. Do you have any idea how many folks are kind of ahead of us in line and looking to finish their own projects? And maybe additionally, how long they've been in queue?
Well, I know that I believe several of the projects were wrapped up with the last funding amount. So I'm hoping that we will have a significant dollar amount from the DNR, but I have a call in to get that answer. Great.
That is it for all my questions. Thank you for your work. Thank you for this update. I look forward to learning more about legislative strategy. I am willing, and I would imagine that all of us on this call are eager to knock on some doors and to talk to some legislators. So thank you for your help with this.
Thank you.
All right, moving on to item number 3 on our agenda, the strategic plan update. Mr. Merrick.
I'm going to share my screen here. Can you see that slide, everyone?
Yep.
So in your packet, there's a kind of a complete version of the city's strategic plan, and specifically our action plan, which we're trying to update the council quarterly. Kind of summarized what you may notice as updates from our last update. So newly completed, the council, along with the planning commission and staff leadership, completed bias and inclusion, not including training, developed a concept for Riverside Park, thanks to Chad, Aaron, and the folks from Bolton and Mink for developing that concept. The housing action plan is on the city council's agenda tonight, and I know Aaron will be addressing this, but just to kind of put some context to that, I would call it more of a work plan, because there are plenty of things to do. It's a phased approach to have these intentional discussions on affordable housing, but the action plan doesn't represent what I would call a finished product or a finished position on where the city council wants to be on affordable housing, because those councils haven't occurred yet. So it's more of an intentional work plan related to that issue. And then progress, staff has had a kickoff meeting for water service related to a residence guide. If you remember, one of the kind of hallmarks of that was to give residents a better understanding of how the water service works, how it relates to charges and fees, etc. So Chad and Bolton and Bink are really kind of working on putting that together, along with some help from Nicole Schmidt, who is really helping us a lot with our communication pieces. Dave Anderson, the city attorney, will be leading a conversation with the council at your next work session related to large event permitting. Just if you can recall, I think everyone is kind of used to steamboat days, but as the city gets larger, there'll be different dynamics and requests related to permitting for large events. And we want to make sure that we have a consistent and equitable process for handling those requests and the services that might be needed to facilitate those requests or those events. And then Aaron Smith and Dan and Aaron Schmidt, I think Chad has been helping as well, are developing some tower concepts. So the Tower 2, which needs to be painted, that's the tower north of Mills Fleet Farm, needs to be repainted as a maintenance item, but we're per the strategic plan looking at some design concepts as a part of that maintenance project. And so later on this winter or maybe early spring, we'll have some concepts and some cost impacts for your consideration at the work session. So that's kind of a summary. There's obviously more in the plan that we could discuss. So if you have specific questions that I didn't cover or topics, feel free to ask them now.
Anybody have any specific questions? I'm seeing Joy shaking her head, Christy's shaking her head, Glenn's shaking his head, and then I scroll down to find, okay, sorry, Laura, you're on page 2. So I know probably a lot of shaking. I don't think we have any questions as a group, Brent. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Moving on to the city manager's report.
Okay, a few things for you this evening, Mayor and Council. As some of you know, we're going to be doing some soil boring work in the Eagle Ridge neighborhood related to the 2022 street maintenance project. You also see some related soil boring work for 6th Street West. So we're planning to see those folks from Braun out the week of January 24th. At your last council meeting, we talked about, you have something, Glenn? I can't hear you.
You're on mute, Glenn.
It's gonna be a little fourth week.
Oh,
Boring.
You're cutting out real bad, Glenn.
at your last meeting, we talked a little bit about winter parking and some unique provisions on 3rd Street West. And we started doing a review of that, the city attorney and I, along with Chad, and found that, you know, the winter parking provisions are a very small part of the overall parking and traffic ordinance that the city has. And in looking at it and kind of understanding, I think a little bit of the rhythm of how the city council likes to do business. I think if we just came to you with 2 minor changes, you'd have probably a dozen questions in other areas of the ordinance asking, why is this here? And do we still do this? And so we found that it's probably an ordinance that's probably 25 to 30 years old. And so we've sent out copies to engineering, public services, the fire department, and the sheriff's office to have them do a head-to-toe review of that ordinance with comments, feedback, etc. And then we'll work on a redraft of that, and then present that to the council probably likely this spring. So we'll have a hold on some of those provisions within the winter parking confines that we discussed at your previous meeting. So any questions on that? And then the last thing I kind of wanted to touch on, and it's a significant issue in terms of kind of context. We are feeling like the sheriff's office is paying attention to it, not just here, but countywide. And frankly, it's a nationwide issue where there's just a shortage of police officers entering the field, or in some cases leaving the profession. And so the sheriff's office has been going around through the county, introducing kind of a interim model to try to cover some shifts. The city of Carver had some concerns related to coverage, and so we're staying on our traditional shift of our more or less 8 to 4:30 town cop model. We don't have we have an evening position, but it's currently not filled just due to not having someone to fill that shift. So I've been in regular contact with the sheriff's office. Commander Mike Wallin and I have been talking, and I'll be getting quarterly updates. So nothing certainly to be alarmed about, but it's, when you have, you're funding 2 full-time positions and you have one out, then that's right away 50%. And so certainly something that I just wanted to keep on your radar. I'm going to be trying to work out some dynamics of our contract model, and that we kind of pay a deposit for those services in advance. And so I want to work out some type of arrangement with Commander Wallin on paying that kind of full deposit, considering that we don't have a person filling that evening shift. So little things like that come up from time to time. But really my point of this update is to kind of, I know that you're all aware of this, just refresh this again for you. And if you're seeing things or hearing things or getting feedback from residents, that you share that with me, so that we can continue to have a conversation with the sheriff's office. They're still obviously responding to calls. It's just the presence right now that we're short on related to that evening coverage. So happy to answer any questions or get feedback to share with the sheriff's office.
Go ahead, Christy.
Well, I think we all understand what's going on in the law enforcement business, and we can't make people that aren't there, right? So we can't just make up bodies that don't exist. We used to in the past have a shared agreement with another community where we get a percentage of time here and they get a percentage of time there. Is there any chance of looking at any surrounding communities to look at getting, going back to that model so that they may have a cost savings? We may get a little bit more coverage in the evening.
Are you kind of thinking of like that when we used to have Deputy Trek on in the summers? Or are you thinking?
No, we used to do like the percentage where, let's say they were in, I'm just picking the city, Watertown for 65% of their whatever, and then they were in Carver 35. And it's an older model, but we used to have it.
I can certainly reach out at just based on conversations that we've had collectively with other city managers and the sheriff's office. I'm not hopeful that would be a possibility. I mean, I'm hopeful that it would be a possibility. I'm not hopeful that they would be responsive to providing that. But I can certainly ask and follow up with the council.
Okay. And again, thanks for always checking into it, Brent, but it kind of is what it is at this point till we can get some more officers on the Carver County team. So thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody else with questions? Brent, thanks for bringing this up again. Like we said when we talked this afternoon, if there was any other city department and we were down by 50%, we would be talking about this, right? So if and when building inspections was down by 50%, we had the conversation. So I appreciate you bringing this up. I do want to make sure that when we get invoiced from the county that we're not prepaying for a deputy who hasn't been serving our community. I think there's some room to improve that invoicing model, but that's not a hill I want to charge at this point. But I do think that, for getting one deputy at this point, we're not going to be paying for 2. So I want to make sure that that's the case. I don't think I asked you this when we have spoken about the topic, but have they given you any indication as to when we think we'd see that position filled? Months, next quarter, 2 quarters?
Yeah, it's not something that I've asked them to speculate on. I mean, at the beginning of these types of conversations, the sheriff's office had discussed this changed model that they are using in different cities, as something that was probably going to end the first quarter of 2022. So, that would be kind of a milestone point. I also talked to the county administrator, Dave Hemsey, on Friday afternoon, and he shared with me that through staff's work, the county board will be considering the advancement of a new or upgraded pay model for deputies and law enforcement staff within the county. So I think all that helps. I am aware that their FTO process, or essentially kind of training in officers, is pretty comprehensive and extensive from a time and resource standpoint. So even getting that person in the door could mean that several months before they're kind of ready to go. The city managers in Chanhassen and Victoria and myself meet with Sheriff Cameron once a month to kind of get updates, talk about what's going on in our community. So that's going to happen here in about a week. So I should have some additional information to share if there's additional information by your next work set or by your next work meeting.
Go ahead, Christy.
So Chaska has historically done backup for us on different calls. Are they still doing that? I mean, if we call 911, are they gonna respond to us as timely as Carver County Sheriff, or do we know anything about that and how that's been working?
I missed the first part of what you said there.
Okay, so historically, the Chaska Police Department, up when we call in. So you'll get Carver County Sheriffs, and then the Chaska Police will come also. Do you have any idea? I mean, are they still responding in that manner?
Yeah, I don't have great firsthand knowledge of that, other than to say that Chaska very, very infrequently would come in as a backup, only if it, at least in my experience, only if it's reaches a certain level of crime, like for example, this is maybe close to 10 years ago, we had someone attempt to break into the water treatment plant, and I think Larry Revering had called, and I think, anybody who was in law enforcement at the time, considering the water treatment plant, came over there. But other than that, like your basic like speeding types of calls or stuff like that, the county has area cars, or like the Victoria car would come down, or the Chan car would come down. So I'm pretty confident that the sheriff's office will cover us under any circumstance. And if it reaches a certain level that, Chaska would come and assist, just like the county would come and assist in Chaska if it reached a certain level. I'm not sure if that answered your question or not, but.
Can I take a stab at this, Brent?
Yeah, go ahead, Chief.
There's been no change in Chaska's response. They do respond every once in a while, depending on the nature of the call. And they were at a call about a month ago, a medical call. But if it's a PI or things like that, and they're not busy, they will respond depending on where it's located, and that hasn't changed at all.
All right, thanks, Kelly.
From a call standpoint that we've been on.
Thanks, Brent. Thanks, Kelly.
Any other questions? All right. Anything else on your list, Brent?
Nope.
All right.
Thank you.
Council requests? Hearing none, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Make a motion to adjourn.
Motion by Councilmember Knight
I'll second.
and a second by Councilmember Mock. Vicky, we have to do a roll call vote for this one as well? Okay.
Yes.
Can you call the roll for the vote, please?
Yes, Councilmember Henry,
Aye.
Councilmember Mock,
Aye, Christy Mock.
Councilmember Sayer,
Aye, Lori Sayer.
Councilmember McKnight,
I, Joy McKnight.
and Courtney Johnson.
I, Courtney Johnson. All right, motion passes. We are adjourned. We'll see you all in about 13 minutes.